So this is Anna Hamilton with the Sam Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Today is Flag Day. It's June 14th, 2024 at about 10:45 in the morning. We're here at the Sanders Beach Community Center with a beautiful backdrop behind Keith Wilkins, who we're going to be speaking with today for the Pensacola Environmental History Project. So with that, will you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, I'm Keith Wilkins, retired city administrator for the city of Pensacola and formerly the Natural Resources, Environmental, and Community Development Director for Escambia County, which is the county Pensacola is in. And then some private sector environmental consulting work. My background is University of West Florida, degree in environmental studies and policy, and I'm pretty much a native Pensacolian.
So when you say pretty much, what exactly does that mean? Can you tell us a little bit about your family history?
Okay, yeah. My dad was in the Air Force, and so we bopped around a little bit, born in Missouri, so it's kind of some of those Midwestern roots. My mother was from this area from 230 years ago, and we moved here from Mobile. There was a Air Force base in Mobile, closed down. My dad retired, moved over here to NAS Pensacola, got a job civil service when I was in 7th grade. So I moved here when I was 12. And prior to that, we moved around, including Portugal and the Azores, Germany, Missouri.
That's quite a bit of moving around before the time you're, 12 or 13 in 7th grade?
Right, yeah, a lot. My parents continued that after my dad retired. They still kept moving, even within town. Every couple of years, they'd buy a new house and we'd all move.
And how was that lifestyle for you?
It was good in that it segmented things to where memories are pretty definitive. Oh yes, this happened those years, we lived there, those friends there. And I think it's balanced well with the fact that I did move here fairly early in middle school, so I do have long-term friendships also. And so, even though we moved a lot in town, kept the same friends. So I think it's great. I love it. My wife is different. She lived in the same house from the time she was born until she went away to school to University of West Virginia. And so she doesn't have those segmented memories, but she has some great relationships with friends from, kindergarten on. And
where's your wife from?
She's from West Virginia, Charleston, West Virginia. She's a hydrogeologist.
Nice. And do you have one, since it sounds like you lived all over the world, one particular place that really stands out as maybe like the core memory of your childhood?
Childhood core memory, I'd say Mobile, Alabama. Mm-hmm.
And what about Mobile?
My mother's parents were there. A lot of her family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, that kind of thing. So that really stands out. And then the Air Force base there was on the bay in Pensacola. Our house fronted Mobile Bay, and so it was nice waterfront. And yeah, so it was a great place and real prevalent childhood memories.
And so when you finally kind of landed in Pensacola, did that start to feel like home pretty quick? Tell me just about how that's.
Not at first. We moved here for 1 year, moved to New Orleans because they have, no grass is going to grow under their feet. So we moved to New Orleans for a year, then moved back here again. My brother went to a different high school all 4 years of his school. But we moved back here when I was a freshman in high school, so that the continuity started then, really. But it was great. It was a good childhood, memories like, say, Mobile. And here, it really started feeling like home in high school. Mm.
And what are the local schools that you attended here in Pensacola?
Warrington Middle School, which I've also mentored at. And then Pensacola High School and University of West Florida, Pensacola Junior College, and then University of West Florida.
Were you tempted to go somewhere else for college? It's striking that you stayed in Pensacola.
Yeah, actually, I had a 4-year scholarship to Troy, which is in Alabama. It's a couple hours away, so I don't know if that's really hardly somewhere else. But I had a 4-year scholarship to there. I went up to Troy, didn't like it. And so sorry, all of you Knights, I think they are. and turned that down, came back to Pensacola and just funded my own education through junior college and college. I was kind of tempted to look at California. A lot of friends of mine, surfed, and a lot of friends of mine went out to California. At that time, education was, I think, free. And college was free in California. And so University of California, Santa Barbara particularly teased me. And then also Maine, in Orono, Maine, for some reason stuck out with me. But I went to UF for 1 quarter, and and for some reason, I don't know if it was a girlfriend or what, but for some reason I didn't like it. It didn't stick. And I started looking through college catalogs of what really was a good fit for me. And coincidentally, the University of West Florida had the environmental program that I was looking for that was kind of interdisciplinary. That in Gainesville, they didn't have an interdisciplinary program. I was actually, I think, forestry there, looking really at geology. But that was too narrow, more narrow than what I wanted, and UWF had an interdisciplinary environmental program, so I moved back home.
That's so interesting that you kind of vetted all these different programs across the country, and it turned out right here was maybe what you were looking for.
Yeah, I wonder how much coincidence that was versus just, kind of subliminal go home. I don't know.
And so tell us about really coming into that line of study. Why were you interested?
I'd always been interested in land for some reason. In Mobile, we lived close to a giant, huge clay pit where they'd excavated to build the interstates with, and a lot of woods out there, kind of on the edge of town. And so I spent a lot of time in the woods then. I collected leaves and feathers and rocks, and had a nature guide from the time I was, before I was 10. And so it was just always something intrinsic that interested me about it. A friend of mine's dad was a real estate attorney, and I thought, well, gee, that'd be a great job for me. I like land, and he's a real estate attorney, and so I actually, when I started college, I assumed I would go pre-law, and then didn't, because I worked for a bunch of attorneys at the time, and all they did was sit inside and read books, and I thought, that's not me. So I need to be outside. So I dropped the law part and I kept the environmental part.
Do you still have some of the collections from when you were a kid, collecting leaves and feathers?
I have my rocks, yeah. I don't have the feathers or the leaves, but I have the rocks.
Do you have like a prize kind of a rock that you're especially proud of? Or?
I do.
Can you tell us about it?
A couple. I have a piece of obsidian that I found in my backyard in Mobile, and I don't know why it was there, because it's not native to Alabama, or at least Mobile. It's black and real shiny, naturally shiny. And then I have some polished rocks I got at a rock show in Jackson, Mississippi, when I was up visiting an aunt and uncle there, that one was like a bloodstone, and then there's a green agate that I really liked.
That's so cool. I'm just thinking about that obsidian. Have you ever had it like tested or anything?
No, never have. I've still got it in a little old cigar box at home.
That's great.
Good questions.
No, it's just really interesting. I mean, your connection to the land and how our personal interests really impact our career paths.
Yeah,
they're not necessarily so separate.
It really did with me. And then moving to Pensacola, my brother was 3 years older than me, and he started surfing, so I started surfing. So the beach and the water really interested me. And at that time, in the early 70s, the beach wasn't nearly like it is now. And so we saw development just encroaching on places that were natural dunes and natural coastline. And we could see impacts of that. I mean, there's traffic, tourism, people on the beach, and bird populations disappearing over the years. And so that really kind of got me interested in environmental impact, and probably led, all that was in high school, and probably led more to the environmental thing too. It fit very well with my land love.
And so remind us of the degree you graduated with.
It was environmental studies and policy.
And where did you head from there with your diploma in hand?
I took a cross-country trip to go surfing in California and thought I'll look for a job in California. At the time, Edward Abbey and a lot of those guys, they had all started in fire towers. And I thought, I'm going to go sit in a fire tower in California. Well, I went out there, and that wasn't, I didn't even look for a job. I surfed and traveled around, and I thought, okay, well, on my way back, Department of Interior has a big office in Denver. I'll go by there and I'll apply. My parents were both civil servants at the time. I thought this would be easy. Well, it wasn't easy. It was very bureaucratic. They don't have anybody you can go in and talk to. You do it all through the mail and applications and stuff. And so I didn't look for a job there either. Came back. So I'd been gone for 5 or 6 months. I worked on a ranch out in Wyoming for a while because I ran out of money, and decided I wanted to come home, so I needed some money. Worked on a ranch, made some money, got back home, and a friend of mine had gotten a job working offshore in the oil field, and I thought, I don't want to do that. It's nasty, it's dirty, it's anti-environmental. I just don't want to be part of that. And he said, oh, no, this job is great. He said, you're describing the cuttings that come out of the well, and you're in this little air-conditioned unit, and you don't have to mess with anybody else, and they've got stereos and this kind of stuff in there. And I thought, oh, okay, that sounds pretty decent. So I'd gotten mad at my car, and I sold it. And so I didn't have a car at the time, so I rode a Greyhound bus over to Thibodaux, Louisiana, and walked from there to the office, and they hired me on the spot. It was a Friday afternoon, though, and they said, can you start now? And I was like, well, no, I don't have anything, I just got off the bus. And so they said, okay, we'll come back Monday morning and you can start. So I rode the bus back to Pensacola, and then I started the next Monday training and worked offshore for a couple of years. Then I was just telling y'all that gave me the experience of drilling and boreholes and cuttings and mapping, subsurface formations, which got me into the water management district in Havana near Tallahassee.
And so that was your move from working offshore?
Right, yeah.
And what was that job like compared to what you'd been doing?
A lot cleaner. When you work offshore, your circle of friends gets real small because you're constantly going and coming. And I was on call. It wasn't a regular 2 weeks on, 2 week off kind of thing. We were on call, so we'd go out, and I go out for 6 weeks at a time and come back. And so your circle gets real small. And so, being at a land-based job, working 40 hours a week instead of 84 hours a week off on a rig in the Gulf of Mexico, you develop your social network again. So it was very different. And my first day, I remember I sat down with a topo map, and I was mapping locations of wells. And I thought, this is exactly what I want to do. This was the perfect job, working with maps. And so I loved it.
It sounds like a really unique vantage where you're spending that much time in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. It's not something that most people get to see or do or experience.
No, it was very different and unique. It's a good job for a young person who's single. It's hard to keep a date, If you want to date somebody, it's hard to keep a friend. But it was a great experience. I mean, particularly liking the water. I could go out and I can remember watching the waves, and the size of the swells. And most of the time we'd fly out in a helicopter, and so you could see fish and sharks and stuff like that from the helicopter. And it was great.
Is there anything especially, I feel dumb asking this, but especially remarkable that you remember seeing that felt really, wow, powerful, or that stuck with you?
I can remember seeing 30-foot swells with people on the rig were even getting seasick. That was remarkable. I can remember seeing some sharks. It was remarkable. A couple of helicopter flights. My helicopter pilot got lost once, and I knew we weren't going to the right place, but he didn't. Got fogged in one time, and the helicopter didn't, I guess they had a radio direction, and that was it. So they had to actually get down where they could see the land and follow roads to get back there. And then one time a helicopter crashed on the way to our rig, and a couple people died. coming to our rig to pick up some of my crew. And one time a guy on the rig died, and they put him in the freezer because it was really rough, and they couldn't get him off the rig. So he sat in the freezer for 3 days. So yeah, there's a ton of, just like Superfund, there's thousands of stories.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I can spend all day talking to you just about that. That's my problem. But I do want to start to fast forward a little bit, at least this time, and I hope we can come back and talk to you again because I know
I will ramble
so
endlessly. Go ahead.
Fantastic, thank you. So kind of talk to us about, and I apologize again for skipping over so much of your life, but take us towards kind of working more on environmental impact, especially here in Pensacola.
When I went to work at the Water Management District, it was in Tallahassee, and again, I wanted to get back to Pensacola. I spent a little over 3 years in Havana or in Tallahassee. So they gave me the sand and gravel aquifer. And they said, okay, you're the hydrogeologist, you're the guy for the sand and gravel aquifer. And so I got to come back a lot anyway. We were doing an ambient groundwater study here. So that really fit me well, I think. I got to publish from that. Some research on sand and gravel aquifer and on some coastal sewage treatment plants. So that was just a really good fit, and that got me very interested in environmental impact. I saw, particularly with Superfund, there was a SAT battery site in Mariana, I think it is, or just south of Mariana, which was the first Superfund site I was ever on. They wanted me to come out and log some wells. And I came out to log the wells, and the wells were just PVC pipe, through a hole. They weren't sealed back. You're supposed to seal formations so you don't cause interchange of water from one unit to another unit. Well, they didn't. Their contractor hadn't sealed the wells, and so I thought, well, this isn't right. So I logged the well and went back and reported them to DEP that the wells weren't constructed appropriately, and we regulated wells also at the district, and so we got to go in and enforce against them. So anyway, things like that really got me interested in industrial impacts to the environment, not just development, and commercial type work, but industrial impacts to the environment.
I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about learning about Superfunds, what they are, what they involve, what their risks and threats are?
Yeah, Superfund came along, the CERCLA, right as I was graduating college, 1979 and 80. And so, it was that period, the 70s, when I was in high school and college, was huge for environmental regulations. So much happened then. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, CERCLA, RCRA, TSCA, FIFRA. And so that was all very current in my head. So when I go out to a Superfund site, it was fresh knowledge. I knew about the program, and I knew that it also had a monetary component to it because it was a compensation for those environmental damages, and that always really interested me. I didn't get to work on that though, on the compensation side of it for years, but that really kind of piqued my interest and knowledge with it. And then when I went into consulting after I left the district, I didn't work on a Superfund site, but I worked on some heavy industrial sites. And one of them was right over here across, just a couple blocks away, the old Reichhold chemical plant. And it was close to this Superfund site. And so I knew things were going on, I knew about it. And like I said, that impact on that scale really, really interested me.
I'm wondering if you can just dig into that a little bit more for us. Like what specifically felt interesting to you and how you saw yourself in your role and the difference that maybe you could make?
I'd like to say it was the human health side of it, but it wasn't. It was the environmental degradation and the loss of resource to me that really spoke loudest to me. That what we're doing, the legacies we're leaving as a society or as a world, the legacies we're leaving and treating the world like it's disposable, and it's not. And that's really what hit me the hardest, was when I saw that, because you contaminate a site and you move somewhere else. You contaminate that site and you move somewhere else. Just like we've done with so many things, losing farmland to subdivisions, or inner cities that become derelict and everybody moves to the suburbs then, and the core is rotten, basically, and leaving that behind. And I had a friend one time when I came to work at the county to work community redevelopment. He said he didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could do that. And he had grown up inner city Pensacola and moved out to the suburbs. So that waste is what really, really got me. And then I realized, okay, well, human health is a good component there also. But it really was the loss and the waste that hit me hardest.
And when you turned your sights to Pensacola, will you tell us just about kind of learning about the Superfund sites here and getting like a clear sense of the Superfund landscape here? Okay,
when I was at the Water Management District, one of the projects I did was I think I mentioned the ambient monitoring well network that we established here. And part of that was locating where the public water supply wells are. And part of it was locating where the contaminated sites are. And at that time, the only mapped contaminated sites were the real serious ones, like Superfund or something that was on the national priority list. And so we co-located those. When I put the map together of where those sites are versus where we get our drinking water from, the susceptibility to that was just incredible. It floored me because they were just all commingled together. And you realize then the risk. And at that time, I thought, well, we need to, Pensacola, because I was in Tallahassee, Pensacola needs to move all their wells to the north and get them out of the inner city. And made that recommendation. It didn't happen. They now had treatment that they'd put on wells, big carbon tanks that they'd put on wells. But that's really what put all the pieces together for me for Pensacola, was seeing how all those were co-located together and the risks that were there for the population and the limitations that would place, and just kind of ignorance, that it places on us as a community.
I'm wondering what it felt like for you to kind of make this realization about this place as your home, where family and friends live, and it's a place you're trying to kind of move back to. Like, what went through your mind when you...
Frustration that you see these things happening and there wasn't, like we talked about earlier, political will. There wasn't the political will to do anything about it. So it was very frustrating to me. And I thought, well, okay, for me, some people protest and some people ignore it. And to me, it was working on the inside. I did my protesting in college and stuff, but I thought that we need people on the inside that are aware of those issues and that can maybe then influence decision makers or be a decision maker to help avoid those and help cure some of those ails. So that's the track I chose then, is I thought, like, I'm gonna work on the inside to do this. My kids, I have a son in Portland and he's a protester, which is great. It takes it.
So what prompted your move from the Water Management District back here to Pensacola?
My daughter. I had a daughter in Tallahassee. I actually lived in Carabel, south of Tallahassee on the coast, and had my daughter, and I thought, need to be close to, she needs to know her grandparents, and that, and my parents were getting older too, so family is what prompted me to move back to Pensacola.
And what position did you take here?
I went into business with a friend of mine. I was talking to him on the phone, and I said, I'd just really like to get back to Pensacola. Katie is 3 months old or something at the time, and all those reasons. And he had a landscaping company, and he said, well, hey, you can come in business with me. And so I said, okay. And so I left the district and moved to Pensacola and landscaped for about 1.5 years. At the same time in the winter, when things don't grow up here in this part of Florida, I taught high school for 1 year, and then got a call from a headhunter, or a friend of mine, actually at the Suwannee River Water Management District, asked if you give my name to a headhunter? And I said, yeah, sure. So he gave my name to a headhunter, and that got me into my first real consulting job, which was to open an office here for a groundwater remediation firm.
And what kind of work did you do in that consulting capacity?
We did contamination assessments. So you go out and you put in borings and you put in wells and you study the extent of contamination on a piece of property. A lot of service stations at that time, it's not mid 80s, and the whole underground storage tank regulations were hitting. So we did a lot of contamination assessments to look at the spread of soil and groundwater contamination, and then the remediation, the cleanup of those, and different cleanup technologies that you would apply to that. And that was most of the work of what we did. And a little bit later in the 80s, when people started getting caught with contaminated properties and the loss of value on those properties, the liability under CERCLA started hitting people and being enforced. And so that's when the real estate transaction analysis came in of, before somebody buys a piece of property, banks were requiring you to do a historical analysis of the property, and then maybe even collect some new data on the property, so that banks aren't taking mortgages on properties that are contaminated and really not worth what they were appraised at. So it kind of morphed into that side of the industry, looking at dollars and cents and environmental liability.
And so tell us about specifically coming back to work on the Superfund sites here and the work that you've done.
Okay. I had worked, like I say, into the monetary side of this and seen the impact on communities. And doing that, I had moved to Miami with KPMG and had worked down there for about 3 years. And I wanted to get back to Pensacola. So I was nominated and was sitting on the county's Brownfield Advisory Committee, even though I was in Miami. And that kind of gave me contacts with the county, and I ended up being hired by the county to start, well, they had just started a fledgling environmental department, and I was hired then to come in and be the director of that and their community redevelopment, which bridged environment and development together, which was perfect for me. So that, and the Superfund site, which is right up the street from my house, was one of the immediate issues that the county was dealing with. There were several. I mean, stormwater was an issue, wetlands were an issue, and the Superfund site was a huge issue. So, and the Superfund site fit my background much more so than wetlands did. I had to relearn a lot of wetland type stuff, but that was really the impetus, was that Superfund site and the groundwater contamination there and the remediation, the impact on the community, and it's something more positive could be done with that property.
And that was Escambia treating? That
was Escambia treating, yeah. And it was 85 acres on one side and about another 20 acres on the other side of Highway Palafox. So that's about a total of 100 acres.
That's a substantial.
Inner city, 100 acres, that's a lot of land.
And so why was that a priority at the time for the county and the city?
It wasn't until, I mean, I guess it was because they had a lot of, the environmental justice movement was beginning, and they were getting a lot of noise, a lot of input from that community, and also they needed somebody because of the wetlands and development issues too, so they just threw it all together. That was a really good fit for me, so it became an issue with them because of the public, really, and the press, not because of the opportunity that they would have there. And so that's kind of what I really tried to do, was educate them as to, this isn't just a problem, it's also an opportunity. And so that, and I got excited about that, because I could see the economic development side of it and the plus, as well as the technologies that I'd worked with on groundwater remediation, that it was just a really good fit, I thought, for me. And it was my hometown.
And so what were you hearing from the public as this buzz is starting to build up about this property? You mentioned it was in the press a lot at that time. Just can you set the scene for us about what was happening and what you were hearing?
Okay, the societal buzz was the impacted community, those that lived in Rosewood and Escambia Arms. And that's Margaret Williams and the environmental justice side of it. So they were really had a loud voice and informed the Citizens Against Toxic Exposure group, and they had a lot of members there. And so they had a strong lobby locally, which was terrific. So that was, I guess, one of the strongest impetus for them. But also, like I said, the opportunity for the redevelopment there was unknown to them, but I saw that opportunity and wanted to try to convince them that there was something there that they could really take advantage of. But really it was Margaret Williams and those folks. And then there was a weaker side to it of the actual environmental impact, which had then been traced migrating eastward about 2 miles into a Bayou de Har, which was a very prominent, a lot of money there around the bayou in the city of Pensacola. And so that was starting to get attention too, was just the environmental impact there. But the loudest voice at the time was the environmental justice side of it. And then once you get all the, the downtown crowd that lives around the bayou, all concerned about their property values and impacts to the swimming in the bayou, that it all came together about that time.
I'm curious because you worked for the local government and you're a member of the community. Can you talk to us about just what it means to kind of have both of those things inform the work that you do and what you care about?
Yeah, at first it was all very just simpatico. It was, they put me out there, and as long as good things were happening, it was fine. But it did become an issue at the point when my kids were at Broward Barge Middle School, which is right across the street from 2 Superfund sites, and it had become an issue because obviously now they had data that the school property was impacted too. And I had to go to the county administrator and at that time draw that line for him that okay, this is my job, this is my life, and right now I'm gonna go take care of my kids and be active in that movement to relocate to school, not as a county employee, but as a citizen. So I just had to make that real obvious and straightforward and keep it that way, because you'd go to public meetings and I'd stand up, and I knew the school board's health and safety director. He and I had gone to school together, and we're a little bit like, we were in a little bit of conflict there. But, I understood he had a job to do, and let him know that, hey, I'm not the county coming here now, I'm a parent. And that helped a little bit, helped smooth things over a little bit, but there was definitely conflict there.
And can you just tell us a little bit about your feelings and the concerns that you did have for your family? I imagine you weren't the only person in this kind of position. No,
there was a strong movement of parents and students then, and former students then, that were involved with that, and some of them were videographers. They were professional videographers too. So there was a lot of that, a lot of airtime dedicated to it, and a lot of recording going on of those meetings, and there were no direct correlation was ever made, but there were some health impacts too. The dioxin causes acne. Of course, middle schoolers have acne too, but was it exacerbating some health issues with the students, and then pictures came out of kids playing in puddles on the school grounds, and I don't know, of playing in puddles and of contaminated soil, they're puddled over contaminated soil. And so all of a sudden, a lot of that came to light, and they ended up relocating the school.
And how did it feel for that, knowing how long it takes for there to be progress on Superfund sites for you all to have this kind of?
That, fortunately, I mean, is in geologic time, it happened pretty quick. The school relocation, I guess, took several years, but it did happen. And all the while, you got the 40 years of Escambia treating going through everything it went through. So the school board finally listened and they took action, and it was very satisfying, obviously. And to me, it seemed quick. I'm sure to a lot of folks it didn't seem very quick, because my kids went there 3 years and it took all 3 years.
I apologize for jumping around a lot, but I do want to make sure that we have a chance to talk about the relocation that happened with Escambia treating and the neighborhoods around there. Can you just bring us through that process and take us back to that time?
Yeah. There was about 150 single-family residences, and then there was about 200 apartments. The apartments were low income. The family residences were moderate income. They were all, professional people. They were teachers and truck drivers, and they all were working. It wasn't. A lot of people had the thought that, oh, that's all low income, but it wasn't. They were educated people as a minority community, but they had a strong economy there and a close-knit neighborhood. So when this happened, the vision, I guess the visual aspect, was kids playing in the backyard of a house that had a chain link fence. It was the only divider between that backyard and this Superfund site. And then on the Superfund side, you had remediation workers or people assessing the contamination that are wearing the full level A protective gear, respirators and monitors, and the optics of that are not good as the least of the issues. But that's really what brought it to light was, hey, there's something here that something else needs to be done. And so the neighborhood and Margaret Williams and Citizens Against Toxic Exposure really pushed for a relocation. So this is not safe for our families, for our kids, and they pushed for the relocation. And EPA begrudgingly did it as a pilot program. And I don't know what they considered pilot versus just they're doing it, because they've done it at Times Beach and they did it at Love Canal, and those weren't pilot relocation programs. I think they were hoping it was going to be a temporary relocation, but ended up they had to relocate the low-income community, which was somewhat easier because they had the vouchers and were income qualified for that benefit, so they could go into other dispersed apartments and housing in the city or in the community. But the Rosewood Terrace owned their residences, and they had to be bought out and had to find something comparable to move into. And then the cost disparity there became a huge issue because they couldn't sell that house, couldn't use the differential that was being provided for them to get into a comparable unit somewhere else in the county. So it took a long time, took a lot of hard discussions and individual negotiations, and every negotiation was confidential to that family and to the government. So people couldn't learn, oh, you got this kind of deal, you got that kind of deal. So I'm sure there was a lot of disparity in the outcomes there, but eventually they did succeed in relocating and buying all properties but 3. And those 3, the people moved out, but they kept the ownership of the property to try to float on the market when the redevelopment occurs.
I'm curious about what you know about what the community, what those neighborhoods wanted versus the outcome.
Well, they wanted equity. They wanted, I've got a nice 3-bedroom house here. I want a nice 3-bedroom house, 2 baths somewhere else. And I don't want to have an economic, shortfall there. Obviously they would rather have not moved, but they all realized we've got to move. And it did, unfortunately, it separated their neighborhoods, their friendships, their church that they go to, a lot of them went to. So it was hard socially that way, and they would have rather not done that, obviously, too. A lot of them remained members of that same church and would commute back to the church. And Francine will probably tell you about that. But so even though it was begrudging and they'd rather not have gone through it. They realized we have to. So then the pure outcome was how good a deal did they get when they did relocate, and did it cost them any money? And I know there were some that didn't. They had to rely on other sources of income and funding to get into an equal type situation, or they went into lesser situations. So that happened, and then there were some better deals too, where people probably came out ahead somewhat, but not many. I don't think many came out ahead. Maybe some came out equitably.
You mentioned that this, while maybe was a smart health move, disrupted the social fabric of these neighborhoods and these communities. What is your sense of how or whether that community was able to maintain those ties, or just what were the ripple effects after that for them?
When it was all said and done, the community that was still engaged was very happy. They were pleased. They threw a big barbecue, for everybody. Some came back, some didn't. So those relationships were severed forever. And some, particularly the church congregation, they've stayed together, and they still are involved with it. Not much is happening, so there hasn't been much, but as soon as redevelopment starts there again, I know that group will be re-engaged, and they'll, or at least the core members of it will be.
Do you have a sense of where folks relocated to?
It was dispersed, some even out of the county, and they'd left forever. I had the sense that most of them relocated further north into a couple other neighborhoods, Lincoln Park, Wedgewood, a few other neighborhoods that were minority neighborhoods north of there.
And what happened to the homes that they moved from?
They were all demolished. I mean, EPA, they purchased it, then they owned the land, or the Corps of Engineers actually titled to the land, and they demolished all the houses, pulled up the foundations, tested the soils, and remediated. If it needed remediation, they remediated the yards, former yards, and underneath the foundations of the houses if there was contamination there. And now part of the cell of where they put this 300,000 cubic yards of soil, contaminated soil, part of that cell is where Rosewood Terrace was.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the best practices for Superfund remediation are, and who sets those? How do we? And if not, then I can ask you a shorter question.
I guess best practices really leads more into recommendations. I think some of the good practice they have is they have contracted now with, we talked about SKIO earlier, with firms like SKIO to come in and help facilitate public awareness, public engagement, and gain consensus. That's good. They do try to protect the public and the public's interest, even that economic, but that's not their main purpose. Their main purpose is to get rid of the contamination and the public health side of it. But they do try, and if other resources can be brought to bear through other federal programs, as an example, GSA for housing, then they do work with them, but that's not smooth. So while that would be a good practice, it could certainly be improved. Timing, I think, definitely needs to be improved. The whole process needs to be shortened and less bureaucratic, and maybe some of it run parallel instead of sequentially. Another best practice that I saw, or a practice that I saw at Escambia treating versus American creosote, was Escambia treating was so high profile that they kept switching their site managers, and that led to discontinuity of information flow, of relationships, of trust, and even probably of some technologies and technical applications, whereas American Creosote has had the same project manager for as long as I can remember. And he has the community's trust, and he's a good communicator, and he's good with his contractors. So that's a very good practice that they need to continue, is to try to minimize that shifting of management on the sites.
I appreciate you bearing with me on that question. I know it's a big one. I wanted to ask because we've heard from folks just about various frustrations, ranging from particularly for American Creosote, will it actually be remediated? Yeah. Why did certain entities drop the ball? Like it doesn't feel like there's a lot of transparency in some cases. In the case even where the site does get cleaned up, there's still a concern about is that what totality does that represent?
Right.
Like I still might not want to plant vegetables in the ground. So
yeah,
just
absolutely. Those are I don't know if any of that would fall under good practice, but they're real issues. I wouldn't plant vegetables, and eat them in this neighborhood, even though they're remediating down to 2 feet in the neighborhood. I'd be very hesitant to eat a vegetable. Part of the glitch is between local government and EPA, and the transfer of property. In this case, the city, when I was city administrator, but the city really dropped the ball on proceeding with that process of acquisition, and they lost a year and a half because of that. Somebody thought somebody else was working on it, and it was a lost leader type situation. So that's true. The community doesn't feel like anything's going to ever happen, and they don't trust now that it's going to happen because it's gone on for 40 some odd years. And I mean, the span of my career from Water Management District to today has been involved with this site at American Creosote, particularly. And I can understand why someone who's lived here for 60 years thinks nothing's going to happen, nothing's ever going to happen. I have some concerns, but I have faith right now that yes, it's imminent because the funding is available now. But then the fear is that, well, if the federal administration, president changes, then the money could disappear, and it could. It could. And so that's the fear, is if something doesn't start quickly, and it's right on the edge of starting, but if it doesn't start quickly, that the money could get reallocated somewhere else to some other infrastructure project somewhere. And I think that's a real fear. I'm hopeful that won't happen.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to my colleagues for their questions. Because as I promised, I would after 45 minutes, and that time for me has flown by, maybe not for you, but who's got questions? And again, if you'll just say your name before you ask your question.
Hi, this is Leah Johnny. So you had mentioned earlier that the work you do for Pensacola is pro bono. So was there any specific moment or a specific victory or even challenge in which you realized that this is what you were meant to be doing without any incentive?
I think as the years progressed, when I came up to work on Escambia treating, and as the years progressed and I realized that there wasn't anybody that had that same kind of smattering of background information and knowledge to put all the pieces together, there wasn't anybody coming up behind me to do that. And the one that was closest, he retired. And that's still the case. And I think that's why a lot of it is still kind of really slow moving. That's what prompted me when I retired to go ahead and continue consulting, even if it was pro bono, because I've got a state pension now, which is nice. That allows me then to do some of this work pro bono for communities to help fill that gap that isn't coming back up. And I've done a few projects like that, the one in Melbourne and this one here, definitely. So that's what prompted it.
That's very admirable. Thank you.
This is Caitlin Remmer, and I noticed you talk about a lot how time passing brings different fears up, and we talked to Kelly yesterday about the plans of digging under and bringing up the dirt, and I was wondering, with the upcoming hurricane season every year, when like it blows things and water flows, does that change the plans? Does the EPA have to come back and reassess what they're going to do? And does that cause more fear for more time to pass?
Yes. If say this site here, American Creosote, Hurricane Sally came through and did some flooding, and so people observe that. They may smell creosote, again, which they do commonly smell creosote, particularly with heavy rainfalls. So with a hurricane, if you get a lot of rainfall like that, and if it results in some new knowledge, new data, then yes, EPA, and they may have to be prompted, but EPA would then go back and assess, okay, what happened that we didn't expect, or what happened that's new, and that could cause then a change in design, which could then delay the remediation even further.
Thank you.
I'm Beckett Price, and I was wondering, you talk about working around and amongst these very vulnerable communities that are experiencing a lot of trauma, and I was wondering if there were any moments from these experiences that sort of stuck out to you.
There are a lot. I would come home from community meetings from wealthy communities and from poor communities. And wealthy communities were always much less pleasant because they have higher expectations, because they are typically serviced better than the communities that are disadvantaged. And I'd come back from those meetings just really charged up because those people were engaged, they were smart, they were involved, they're passionate, and their concerns were more, they're more about their health and their lives rather than their wealth, and just kind of truer, to me. So time and time again, that would happen. And in particular, there was one very negative meeting I had out on Perdido Key with a beach community that over an endangered species that was awful. And I mean, we were hung in effigy. Our staff was out on Perdido Key over trying to protect the Perdido Key beach mouse, endangered species. And I mean, it literally at times was not safe for me to go certain places. That was never the case with the minority or the disadvantaged communities, never ever. My first community meeting ever was with a disadvantaged community where we put in streetlights, and I got a hug from an elderly woman who said, "Thank you so much. For the first time in decades, I feel like it's safe to walk down the street at night in my community." So I thought, boy, this is the job for me. People come up and hug you, and they're appreciative. The same sorts of things happen with the Superfund sites. When we helped the church asked, when the county was taking ownership of the property, and the church said, "We'd like to serve a helpful role in all of this for the community. And to do that, we would like 1 acre of that land, of that 100 acres, we'd like 1 acre of that land to be titled to the church so that we could then expand into a workforce development center or some type of child care, some kind of helpful for the community." And the county said, "Yes, we'll do that." And that promise was remembered. I thought for sure it'd be forgotten over the years, but I reminded Commissioner May in particular. Commissioner May remembered and is making sure that that's happened. The church, the meeting that happened, the pastor there and Francine, and they were all so thankful and so appreciative. It just really makes you feel good. And that's part of why I wanted to come back, is I wanted to provide a tangible benefit to the community and not just stuff money in partners or stakeholders or shareholders' pockets, but really to provide that tangible support for a community that I cared about. And so those moments like that they really do fulfill that.
Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Sophia Cachaldora, and I wanted to ask, you've mentioned the church a few times as a fixture of the community, even beyond the relocation process. I was just wondering what the name of that church was?
New Hope?
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Amelia Sewell, and we've talked a little bit about your role in the economics of remediating these sites, and we've also talked a little bit about like social justice in that way. And I was wondering if you could shed some light on some of the economic damages that have slipped through the cracks during like this process with all of these sites, and if that has held this community back in any way.
I think the largest, most glaring example of that is the lost opportunity for the redevelopment of the Scambia Treaty and Superfund site. And we had the economic study which showed it could create, if built out, 650,000 square feet of commercial space, 1,700 jobs, $4.4 million of, at 2003 figures, $4.4 million of tax base to the of tax revenue back to the local government, not even federal, but local government, just increasing their tax base. And then the income was in the hundreds of millions of dollars for those 1,700 jobs. So that never happened. So I would consider that the greatest economic loss is the unrealized revenue from that redevelopment.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Hannah Boker. So one thing we've talked about is just the length of time spent trying to clean up these sites. And I was wondering, when you retired, if you did anything to ensure that the work that you've done continues to move forward and doesn't get backlogged.
That's great. That's why I'm doing it pro bono for Sanders Beach particularly and now the city administrator, the guy that came up behind me, has resigned and he's moving to Miami. And so now there'll be somebody new to educate again. So I think that, and that's why I always felt like government really needs to be fully engaged in this, because the private sector, a group of venture capitalists or a development company, they can't withstand that length of time economically. They can't invest here thinking, okay, 40 years down the road, I'll make some money. They've got to have a quicker turnaround. Government, to me, is the only entity that really can withstand the time, and is the only entity that's got that continuity. And even government's continuity is not that great. So that's kind of why I've tried to stay involved in this case in particular. And the Scambia Treaty, if they ask me, I'll re-engage there too. But with this one, I was involved with it the day I retired from the city, and has remained involved.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
This is Leah again. We'd also briefly touched on SCIO and what it does despite being a small organization, and how it has bridged local, state, and federal government. Off the top of your head, do you think you could name any other individual that we or anyone who's interested in knowing more could talk to know more about it?
I can't remember his last name. I can get it though. Matt was kind of the project lead for SCIO here on American Creosote, and he was also involved with Fort Myers Beach after the disaster from Hurricane Ian there. He was involved with that team too, so I worked with him twice, and I can't remember his last name right now, but I can get it for you.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Is it okay if I ask one more then? I'm so sorry. I'm also I was very admired by your protest work that you mentioned, but knowing how historically protests have been received by U.S. government, especially on college campuses or no matter where, did you at any time feel fear, or did you feel that the morality of what you were fighting for took over?
I've not felt fear. with it, and I do feel like the morality, peaceful protest, morality does definitely justify it. I think that it takes kind of the shock value to raise awareness, to then come to, maybe it's a more moderate outcome, but still to move the issue forward. I think it's important. It's an important component of it. Like I said, my son has probably felt fear. We gave him a gas mask. His mother did. I delivered it just a couple of months ago out to Portland, and he's got a helmet, and he said, yeah, he's kicked tear gas canisters away. So I'm sure he's felt fear. But as long as we're not instilling violence, I think it's an important component of change.
All right, thank you.
And it'll be interesting if he sees this.
This is Amelia again. I just wanted to touch on something that you talked about when you answered Beckett's question, when you said that some of the poorer communities had lower expectations for remediation than wealthier communities here. And I was just wondering your opinion on how that affects environmental justice and social justice in this area. Maybe they don't receive the justice they deserve because they don't know to ask for it. I don't know if you could touch on that.
It's huge, and I think it's something so important for government in particular to realize that while someone might be placated with less, that they deserve more, they deserve equity. And someone who makes big campaign contributions maybe doesn't deserve everything they ask for, and they should be happy with less. And that happens every day, every situation that comes up. If you're talking potholes on streets in poor neighborhoods versus wealthy neighborhoods, or rotten trees. I've just got involved in an issue last week of a tree that had fallen. A county tree fell into some people's yard and took out the power. And they weren't getting any action at all. And it was in a poor, disadvantaged neighborhood. So I made some calls, and sure enough, the tree got removed, power got restored and everything. But it wouldn't have happened if and I hate to say it, but if someone that they didn't know hadn't called, it may not have happened, or happened so quickly. And so it happens all the time in all different ways. And it's important for anybody that works for local government to realize I need to provide equitable service to everyone, and not disparate.
Thank you.
Sure.
The last question, just keeping an eye on time, but these are really great. Thank you all.
I'm Madison. I know you had talked a lot about how the lack of precedent to fall back on caused hardships in moving forward with the process behind remedying the sites. And I was wondering if, now that there's 40 years of experience behind working with these sites, that in the future, are you hopeful that this precedent can help not only Pensacola, but other communities as well?
I'm very hopeful. Is precedent or president?
Precedent.
Precedent, okay. Make sure I got that straight. Yeah, and I think, EPA goes back, and this was something that maybe y'all should look at, is they do 5-year reviews of all Superfund sites, and they talk to stakeholders. And I looked at some of that of what I had done for these 2 sites, just kind of freshening up for this. So they do a lessons learned type exercise. How much they go back and incorporate those, I don't know. I'm sure they're more successful with some than with others. But there are comments that are recorded from folks like Kelly and me and other people that have been involved historically in these projects that gives them kind of a pipeline of precedent and of suggestions for future precedent. So I'm hopeful that they take the effort to do that every 5 years, that they would take the effort to implement some of that every 5 years.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thank you so much for your generosity today, letting us probe you, maybe asking you questions that you didn't expect. You spent all morning with us, and I really appreciate it. I know I personally have a million follow-up questions, so I hope that we can come back and
Sure,
talk to
absolutely.
it at some point.
I love it. I love it.
Before we stop recording, is there anything that we didn't think to ask you that feels important to mention, or just anything else you want to add before we leave here today?
Like I said, there's 1,000 stories of things that went on. Political policy, it's not all bad. Some of it's good, some's very good, and some's not. So I guess a parting point would be, what was it the guy said that wrote Just Mercy? You're not as bad as the worst thing you've done, you're not as good as the best thing you've done. That's the case. It's a yin and yang for all the agencies, federal, state, local.
Well, thank you. We'll come back next time with a million more questions.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it.
We do too. All right. Great job, y'all. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Sure.